Henry VII came to the throne in 1485. Now, one of the first things that he had to do was kind of secure his dynasty. It's a bit of a problem. Now, he has to deal with a couple of main things. Firstly, pretenders. You've got Lambert Simnel, who tries to gain foreign patronage from Margaret of Burgundy, which culminates in the Battle of Stoke Field in 1487, where he's decidedly defeated. Simnel ends up as a spitboy for the rest of his life. Then you've got the Perkin-Warbeck thing, where he goes to France in 1492, then he's forced to go to Burgundy, and this leads to the whole trade embargo with Burgundy, which culminates in the Intercursus Magnus. Then Warbeck is forced to go to Scotland. He married James IV's cousin, Lady Catherine Gordon, and then he also... and then he decides to leave Scotland because James pushes him out, goes to Cornwall, tries to exploit the Cornish rebellion, kind of fails, ends up in Tower London, then eventually gets executed. Now, the two main risings Henry has to deal with are the Yorkshire Rebellion, which is basically caused about taxation due to the subsidy from Brittany, and also the Cornish Rising in 1497, which is actually again caused by tax for the war against Scotland. Now, in terms of government, Henry basically used a lot of the councillors who he knew from when he was in exile, but also various people who were under Richard as well. He used various different methods, such as Acts of Attainder, to ensure loyalty. The notable example of that is the Howard family, who, over the period of the Henry's reign, Howard is able to get back all his estates in Norfolk, bar the actual title of the Duke of Norfolk. He's also got other people like Giles Dormley, who's influential in crushing the Yorkshire Rebellion, John de Vere, who's one of his main soldiers, particularly influential at Stoke Field. You've got Bray, who's the head of the Council of Learning. Council of Learning is basically the king to exercise prerogative right. Empson and Dudley, the two great tax collectors of the time. And those are the main councillors, really, of Henry's reign. We've also got Fox and Morton, who are clergymen. Warham, who eventually becomes the Archbishop of Canterbury, he's another clergyman, because Martin V says you can have administrators as popes. In terms of foreign policy, he signs a Treaty of Redol in Brittany in 1489, which is influential because it protects Duchess Anne against various bits and pieces, such as a marriage with Charles. 1492, Etarps, with an invasion of France, 26,000 men. He gets a pension of 742,000 crowns paid, about 50,000 crowns per annum. Spain, you've got the Treaty of Medina del Campo, which is basically a marriage alliance between Arthur and Catherine of Aragon. They both agree not to harbour pretenders and threats against each other. However, it causes problems, and eventually the marriage only takes place in 1500. Marriage only takes place relatively late in the period. This is because of the Perkin-Warbeck threat. Now, after that, after Arthur dies, Henry's like, well, can you marry him to Henry? Ferdinand's a bit less keen in the lines of England, effectively, and due to various things like Henry backing Philip and Joanna and forcing them to sign the Intercursus Magnus, which hands over the treacherous Duke of Suffolk, the marriage doesn't actually happen in Henry VII's lifetime. In terms of economy, you've got the volume of finished cloth going up about 60% during the period. You've got the merchant tailors and the merchant staple gradually getting replaced by the merchant adventurers. Henry gives them patronage in 1500, which allows them to have 24 organisers. Effectively, the navigation acts mean that English will can only be passing English ships. Henry gives them 7 of his navy fleets in times of peace to help them. They have to support with supporting his foreign policy, such as the trade embargo with Burgundy, and also give him short-term loans when he needs it, although it is quite influential. Although the merchant adventurers never get the privileges of the Hanseatic League, who get the privilege to in 1474 and 1504. Religion, relatively Catholic at the time, effectively. There's a bit of Lollardism, but they've basically been crushed for a long, long time. Moving on to Henry VIII, he's a quintessential Renaissance prince. He's read widely, says astronomy and classics and all the rest of it. And he wants to go to war, basically. That's the first thing he does. 1512, he invades France. Well, Ferdinand, effectively his father-in-law, conquers Nevers. 1513, the Battle of the Spurs. That's a particularly minor instance. It's built up this huge propaganda myth, effectively. Moving later, 1514, they all sign for peace. Wolsey has to pick up the pieces with the Etarps pension. 1518, England's isolation is limited because the Treaty of London, which basically is the idea of the Treaty of Universal Peace. It's an idea of basically all the European monarchs coming together, signing a peace treaty in order to unite against the Ottoman Turks. Tournai saw back to the French for 600,000 crowns has been taken in 1513. Moving later, 1520s, he tries to invade France. Charles V, who's the new king of Spain, doesn't really help him that much till 1525. Charles defeats Francis I at the Battle of Pavia. Henry, and then he jilts Mary and restores Francis because he gets annoyed with Henry. Late 1520s, it's about trying to counteract Spanish presence through the Anti-Imperialist League Cognac. 1520s, Henry's got his own problems with a divorce coming up, effectively, which is kind of a problem. 1530s, the only one who wants a Treaty of Nice. This is because Henry doesn't want to cause Catholic powers to invade him. 1540s, you've got the invasion of Scotland twice, with the rough wooing, and then you've got the last invasions of France. In terms of government, you've really got conciliar government about 1514. Wolsey, He's very successful, very influential, except in the 1523 attack on Parliament, when More says you can't do this, and the amicable grant in 1525, which was an abject failure and led to 10,000 men revolting in Suffolk. Following the fall of Wolsey, he's charged with praemunire on the grounds that he couldn't get the king to divorce. Cromwell comes in, passes a load of acts, Act of Restraint of Appeals, Act of Supremacy, Act of the Act of Succession, the Treason Act, and the Act of First Fruit Intents. Cromwell lasts throughout the 1530s, handles the dissolution of the monasteries through the Valor Ecclesiasticus, and eventually closed all monasteries worth less than 200 or less, and eventually the Suppression Act closed them all. 1536 leads to the Pilgrimage of Grace. Rebels led by Robert Aske from the Pontefract Articles, their list of grievances. They basically want the restoration of Catholicism. It's not going to happen. They're crushed by the Duke of Norfolk. Then you move into the 1540s. Cromwell's gone. Late stage of conciliar government. Eventually ends with Edward Seymour taking charge, because Edward Seymour is the uncle of the future King Edward. Basically, you end up with the Protestants, Conservative faction. The main things are religious. The other main thing that happens in Henry VIII's time is religious. You've got the Hume case, you've got the beginnings of anti-clericalism, Tyndale's Bible. Following the 1530s, you've got the King's Book, the 6 Articles, which basically re-establish Catholic doctrine. Although he breaks with Rome, he effectively makes Catholic religion through the 6 Articles, the King's Book, which basically will say transubstantiation is allowed, confession is good, blah, 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 blah. There are some Lutheran hints, though. Moving to Edward VIII's reign, you've got the first thing is foreign policy. Somerset initiates with the War of the Scots, has a crushing victory in the Battle of Pinkie Cleugh, he fails to relieve Edinburgh and Dunbar Castle. The Mary Queen of Scots is taken to safety. Northumberland ends the war with Scotland, and sells Boulogne back to the French for 133,333 because he needs money. Somerset increases the rate of inflation. Henry owes 152,000 Continental Bank as he spent 2.1 million on war, etc. Somerset basically keeps debasing the currencies. At the time of poor harvest, the Malthusian crisis. This caused widespread problems. Western rebellion from the introduction of the new prayer book in 1549 causes problems. Kett's rebellion about agricultural enclosure. Somerset is eventually replaced by Northumberland. Northumberland debases the currency one more time and then starts to rebase it. He puts Mildmay in charge of various things. Mildmay is the one who really starts reforming the currency. Following that, you've got the radical 1552 prayer book, where Cranmer starts getting more Zwinglian. The prayer books originally were designed to get rid of, make services simpler, etc. You've got dissolution chantries in 1547 to pay for war. However, you've also got other problems, which which lead to rebellion as well. Following the 1550s, you've then got the more radical Book of Common Prayer, which, gets rid of music, gets rid of popish vestments in all way, shape or form, and also says that transubstantiation the Eucharist is a remembrance of the breaking of the wine and bread, etc. Moving on to Mary, Northumberland tries to devise, fails. Mary decides to ride to Flammingham, seals her fate in government. Mary has a problem. She has to use Edward's counsellors, notably Paget and Gardiner, who she doesn't like. Basically, the factionalism between Paget and Gardiner is the main feature of her government. Her people like Rochester, Wargrave and Jerningham have no experience in government, which is a bit of a problem. Foreign policy, basically, she marries Philip of Spain. This leads to Wyatt's rebellion, where Wyatt leads 3,000 men against London. They're defeated at Ludgate after Mary makes a plea to the people of London. That's it. Moving on to then she has to intervene in the Franco-Spanish Wars against the French, who were supported by the anti-Spanish Pope Paul IV. Which is a problem for Mary. She's putting a crisis against the papacy. She has to deal with Hardys. Calais is lost in 1558, which doesn't make her liked anymore. She initially repeals all the Edwardian legislation and takes it back to the state of religion in Henry VIII's reign in 1553. It's not until 1555 she can reinstate the Heresy Acts and turn England back to Catholicism by taking the Pope. Cardinal Pole eventually rises in 1554. The main problem is monastic lands, because a lot of the monastic lands are now in the hands of Catholic lords who don't want to give them back effectively, and this causes a huge ruckus. Eventually, and when Paul IV comes, Pole is dismissed as a heretic, and he's replaced by Cardinal Petto, who Mary really doesn't like. Mary does enact some great economic reforms. Through Winchester, she's able to spend 14,000 on the navy per ship, effectively. Gresham, who's also quite influential as well. Paget and Gardiner have arguments basically over religious rights and who Mary should marry. Once Mary's dead in 1558, nobody misses her. Elizabeth comes to power. She rides from Hatfield. Cecil is the new one who's appointed effectively. Now, Cecil's an interesting dude. He's writing a letter since the reign. He has actually a lot of power over Elizabeth. Elizabeth's reign starts off promisingly. You've got the Act of Supremacy and the Act of Uniformity in 1559. The Act of Supremacy makes the Supreme Governor. Act of Uniformity is basically allowing the 1549 prayer book back, 1552 prayer book back, and the main thing is with that is the two main changes. She admits the Black Rubric, which is about the Eucharist, and you've also got the Vestments controversy, which is about how they should dress. She also doesn't like clergy being married, etc., and she also has other issues regarding priests being married, and also she deprives a lot of Marian priests of their living. In terms of foreign policy, you've got 1560, the Treaty of Berwick. She helps the Lord of the Congregation against the French, followed by Mary of Guise. Then she gets involved with the Prince of Condé in France in 1562. There's also a trade embargo with the Netherlands following Councillor Granville. 1567, she lets the Dutch sea beggars strike from England in their problems against Philip, because Philip is trying to unite the Netherlands as well. 1568, you've got the problems with the Genoese loan. The Genoese loan is seized by Elizabeth, 400,000. This leads to problems between the two sides, England and Spain. 1572, after numerous problems between the two of them, she eventually she expels the Dutch sea beggars. They go to a place called Brill, start full-scale uprising against the Spanish, because following Alva's armies and Alva's conquest in the late 1560s. With the French, she tries to get married to the Duke of Anjou. However, this causes a problem with the St. Bartholomew's massacre, where effectively we're trying to work out why they're married to people who hate Protestants, because following Humphrey Coligny's assassination. Throughout the 1570s, Elizabeth is trying to do marriage with the Duke of Anjou and then later the Duke of Alencon. This causes a bit of an issue because they fear that if she has a child now, it will end up in French hands if she dies, especially. 1580s, Parma's army come in after the 100,000 led to the Dutch State General. 1584, Parma's army is basically going to retake the whole of the Netherlands. There's only two provinces left, Holland and Zeeland. 1584, the Catholic League signed a thing with Philip, the Treaty of Joinville, which basically they will support them. 1585, the Treaty of Nonsuch, army sent under Dudley to the Netherlands. Then you've got Drake's raid on Cadiz. You've got the Spanish Armada. 1590s, Maurice and Nassau and De Vere work together to expel the Spanish from the Netherlands. You've got the naval war, which is very limited. The Spanish Armada fails, but the English Armada also fail. The main highlight is 1596 attack on Cadiz, which takes 12 million gallons. You've also got problems in Ireland. You've got Tyrone's rebellion, Kinsale Head. Mountjoy is the one who actually destroys everybody effectively in Ireland. You've got Henry IV. He defeats the Catholics, Battle of Ivry in 1590. Edict of Nantes allows Catholics to worship fully in France. In government, you've mainly got Cecil, Hatton, Burghley, Dudley, etc. Dudley's a new addition in the 1560s, following the Northern Rebellion, which is basically when Northumberland and Westmoreland attempt to marry Mary Queen of Scots and overthrow Elizabeth. It doesn't work. Cecil's very effective in crushing it. You've got conservative councils like Christopher Hatton appointed. However, the Elizabeth mantra, always the same, gets her in problems in the 1590s, especially a lot of councillors are dead. Dudley, his brother, Hatton, the only one who's left is Burghley, and he's beginning to get a bit older, senile. He doesn't reform the Council of Wards, which causes feudal. He doesn't reform the Council of Wards. He doesn't change any of the economic policies. Although the Marian Book of Rates has helped, it's a bit limited by the 1590s and the poor harvest. Effectively, you end up with the factionism in the 1590s between Robert Cecil and the Earl of Essex. This eventually culminates in the Essex Rebellion, which is crushed and led Cecil, the one who actually hands the succession over to James I of Scotland. That's the main problems of government, although to be fair, government tends to work together quite well, except in issues such as the succession, because they need Elizabeth to get married, and the Mary Queen of Scots, who manages to survive being executed after Ridolfi, Throckmorton, Parry and Babington, the four plots against Elizabeth effectively. No more to religion. After the Acts of Uniformity and the Acts of Things, you've got the Vestments controversy which is basically where Archbishop Parkhurst is told to actually do as they're told by the Queen. You've got Strickland, Wentworth, Turner and Cope. Wentworth is after free speech. Turner and Cope are trying to act further Puritan reform in the church, which is a slight problem. Prophesying is supported by Grindal, which isn't prophesying supported by Grindal. Elizabeth really hates prophesying, and she deprives Grindal's legacy. Catholics, you've got the 1571 Act, basically about papal bulls after the excommunication. You've got to say that if you say Elizabeth and the Queen is executable, and also leaving the country, your lands can be seized. 1580s, you've got further acts about recursancy, fines up to £20. And also the Jesuit Priests, following the setting up of William Allen of the priests in Douai in the Netherlands. The priests come in, but they're relatively little, as Haig says. They kind of become almost a status symbol among the Catholic gentry, which is a bit of a problem. The Catholics are really a major minor threat. Although you've got the threat of abroad, the actual indigenous Catholic threat is relatively little. The Puritans is a bit different. They have the high-ranking support such as Burghley and Hatton. You've got the Acting Seditious Secretaries passed against the separatists, which is very effective. You've also got Whitgift in his Lambeth articles about making the clergy swear that 39 articles contain the contrary to the word of God, says the Act of so does the new prayer book, etc., and they support Elizabeth as Queen. Whitgift is very good at getting rid of a lot of the Puritanism, although to be fair, the Puritans can't do themselves a lot down with the Malmesbury Tracts, which make them seem a bit stupid, to be perfectly honest with you. That's mainly the main legislation passed against Puritanism during this time. And then eventually, in the later stages, the Elizabethan government kind of dies. You've got the rebellion in Ireland. She ends up in a lot of debt, although only about 2 years' worth of debt, which is actually pretty good for the reign. And then eventually she dies in 1603, and Cecil's able to get James I in. And 8 days after, Tyrone surrenders and Mountjoy is able to leave to meet with James, sorry.